getting a good shot of you.
Too high?
Oh, good. Perfect.
Oh, thank you. Okay, tonight, Friday, we're coming back to the verses, the first section of verses in chapter 9 of the Avatamsaka Sutra, the Luminous Awakening chapter. And I think in the text, I'm assuming that everybody has an online text, is that right?
Yep, once
Okay.
you show it. Oh.
On the online text, as I'm looking at it, it would be page 12 and 13. 12 and it's Chinese-English interface, so 12 on the left-hand side, 13 on the right-hand side. And the verse we're going to look at tonight is the second verse down on page 1213. It's 日有一切之发生会伤心，见心无所成，当火大明成。The English translation that we're looking at says, if someone toward all wisdom produces a mind of transference and sees the mind as not being produced, then such a one will obtain great renown. And again, obviously the English is pretty literal, but not necessarily fluent in its translation. Especially if you look at this first line, is someone toward all wisdom. What does that mean? I mean, I have two, there's a few of you online that are looking at this, but there's three of us in the hall here tonight, and I'm just looking at the other two that are here and asking, what does that mean? The rao or ro, if, subjunctive, if, supposing, and then the yu can mean toward, regarding, and iche is all, zhi is zhi, wisdom. But what does that mean if someone toward all wisdom? And then the second line, literally fa sheng, can be pronounced as produce or to bring forth, or inspired, resolves upon, commits to, right? Vows even, you can have it as a, and then literally mind of transference. It could be transference thought or an attitude of transference. Again, I'm just trying to play with the Chinese a little bit to open it up. Because I think xin here doesn't necessarily mean mind in the sense of the consciousnesses that's often used. But I think it has more to do with an attitude or a disposition or a profound orientation, a fundamental leaning towards or envelopment attitude is a little too weak. But I think what it means is commits to a deep attitude, a deep inclination towards transference, and we'll look at these terms. Again, going back, either of you want to make a comment on that? Toward all wisdom? I mean, you've seen this many times, right? We've been translating the Avatamsaka. This appears a lot.
Towards all, yeah, I don't know if it was used towards all wisdom as an aspiration for omniscience, understanding everything.
All wisdom would be complete wisdom, in other words. Okay, so we can translate it as if regarding all wisdom. But I mean, if we use it as toward, maybe it means like something in the Heart Sutra when Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara was cultivating the profound prajna, profoundly or deeply cultivating perfection of wisdom. So it means if someone inclined towards, moving towards, on the path towards all wisdom, almost if someone who is that, I would say then naturally brings forth, emanates a vow transference. In other words, I think there's a connection between the inclination to wisdom and transference. And what this is interesting about, because this text is really about the heart and mind of a bodhisattva, this wisdom that's being talked about here, if it's all wisdom, if it's complete wisdom and not a partial wisdom, would then necessarily give rise to transference. Transference, in a sense, I'm going to explain this a little more, give you my spin on it tonight, but I think transference is almost non-dual with compassion. I think they're one and the same. But it's a more active form. It's a specific activity of compassion. But I think the first two lines indicate that if you're going towards all wisdom, then you will bring forth, you will resolve your mind towards transference. It's a necessarily outcome of that. Then the second one says, again, let's see. Literally, seeing mind without that which produce. Okay. What does that mean? You want to try again? I'm sort of keeping you awake with my questions here, but I mean, that's very literal. Regards, what do you think? Give a stab.
Let me try. I'm actually trying to figure out all the text stuff still right now, so.
Well, the shin is the shin above, right? There's a carryover. The second line has a shin, so it produces this attitude, this resolve, this aspiration. But sees, regards this aspiration as not being brought forth. Now this matches the earlier parts of the seeing living beings as Buddhas as non-dual. We go back, right? Worldly and transcending, not different. Sees Buddha and living beings level and equal. And so we have a kind of continuation of a theme here. Now you are said to be someone who does this, has this attitude, has this aspiration, and yet in some way doesn't see it as having brought it forth. What does that suggest to you?
Completely unattached.
Unattached, right?
Unattached, but completely unattached, but almost like spontaneous. It's so natural, it's so spontaneous, you're not even aware you had the thought that now I'm doing this.
Mm-hmm. Effortless.
Kind of, effortless, but it almost like it's the natural result of something that precedes it. Almost as if when someone is filled with joy, they naturally radiate this wonderful smile, but they don't think I'm radiating this wonderful smile. It's a natural consequence of being filled with this great joy. You know what I mean? And so I think that we have to animate this text a little bit in saying someone who's pursuing all wisdom or on the path or leaning towards all wisdom quite naturally aspires to, has this inspiration or this resolve to Hui Xiang, to transfer. And yet, because it's so coming from the natural evolution of wisdom and development and the elimination of klesha and the poisons, it's so natural that there isn't even a thought that it's being done. This is really a wonderful, in the English language, use artless. Artless means it's like what children sometimes do when they're happy or they're sad or they do something wrong. Without a thought, immediately there's something that radiates from them. Joy, a little remorse or shame, or sadness. But it's so quick between the first thought and the expression that there isn't much cogitation, meditation in the sense of contemplation, second thinking going on. By artless, we means, I'm going to quote you tonight from Shakespeare, because I think Shakespeare has a wonderful way of expressing this. But the word we use, it's not strained. It's not effort made. It's closer to what we might call in Chinese wu wei. It is natural, spontaneous expression that doesn't require forethought, a cost-benefit analysis, even a thought to do it. It happens almost by itself. But it happens by itself because it's coming from purity, precept purity and concentration. It's not happening by itself because it's impulse. And this is the important thing. Impulse at this point now becomes aspiration. It's changed. Before it was impulse. Once it's cultivated and refined, it's aspiration, it's inclination, it's leaning. It's the Bodhi resolve. And therefore, that's I think what Confucius meant when he said, when I was 70, I had so attuned myself, so transformed myself, I could follow my inclinations, my impulses, without deviating. I think this is what's going on here. It's artless in that sense. Yeah, go ahead.
But you're saying that it is cultivated to the point that become effortless, natural, spontaneous, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Or if someone is towards this, all wisdom is the one of the characteristic what we can find in ourselves. Means
I missed the second part. So someone...
or it is some of the characteristics of someone's natural disposition even is on the path to the all wisdom.
This is a very interesting idea, because this means what Hui Nong says is the blossoming and the opening of your nature. It is the deep nature of human beings, not the sort of conditioned nature we talk about, eat, drink, and competition and so forth, fight for survival, but a deeper nature, the spiritual nature, which, when unimpeded, naturally starts to just flow in this way. And it flows so fast and so powerfully that it's said to fill up the Dharma realm. It cannot have a limit to it by that point. Moreover, not only is it effortless, but it's not effortine. In other words, it doesn't weary you. This is the other part. Action that's done intentionally with thought, forethought, planning, calculation is fatiguing, it's tiring. This action is coming from effortless, and therefore it seems like this bubbling stream that doesn't have an end to it. I was thinking when I was around, at least with my teacher, I don't know his state, but it seemed to me his caring, his compassion, his engagement was indefatigable. I would get tired trying to keep up with him. At the end of the day, I'd really be tired. He seemed to have a boundless energy and a boundless engagement at the same time being calm. And the only way that, to me, that's humanly possible is if you're completely unattached, you're completely natural, and you're not having to fight off second and third thoughts or do a cost-benefit analysis about what you're doing or wonder if it's working, or if I'm going to get something from this. When that mind stops, that's called the fullness of virtue. There's no impediment whatsoever. And then we go back to the Heart Sutra. Left behind all impediments and obstacles once this wisdom was seen. Therefore, you kick into overdrive. See, this is where I think you get the overdrive bodhisattva, the fifth gear, because now you can just really cruise, and there's nothing holding you back. not because you're not mindful, but because your mindfulness is so pure and unobstructed at this point, it doesn't require a kind of calculating mindfulness. It doesn't require a judgmental, like a jury sitting there, is this good or this bad? This is what I think Wei Nang means, before the mind of good or evil, or right or wrong arises. This is the pure nature functioning. It's not a what we call tabula rasa, blank, empty state, but actually it's the unimpeded fullness of the nature. Anyhow, we go on here, and then such a one will obtain great renown. So let's look at this a little more carefully. I would say I want to look at three ideas tonight if we have time. One is the idea of transference. The other one is the expression not produced, which I think the Chinese is wu suo sheng, without anything that which is produced, literally. The suo being that which is, and then sheng is birth, produced, give rise to, created. And then finally, this idea of renown, which is the translation of the character Ming. Those who are online and know this, my Chinese is mediocre, to say the best. That's because I haven't fa sheng, the great resolve to learn Chinese deeply. So I sort of skate on the surface of it every once in a while, dig down a little. But any event, I think this Ming is the same that's used as name. When you say Nita Mingza, your name, what your name is. If you want to be polite, Ni Gui Xing Shi, your formal name, right? If you're just asking someone kind of casually, what's your name? It's Nita Mingza Shishama. What's your name? Mingza. So this is translated as renown because it has meanings beyond name. It has to do with name recognition, if you will. So let's look at this. Transference, I would say at one level it's an attitude, it's a wish, particularly to benefit others. And then it's coming out of an orientation towards what we would call loving kindness. I think that's a translation of metta. The Chinese just do the kindness, si bei. So the si is just kindness, but in the Pali they do loving kindness. But is it one or two? What's the Pali?
The Pali is metta?
Metta.
Yeah.
So it's a one phrase, but it's rendered in a binomial in English.
Yeah. Kindness, loving kindness,
loving kindness.
Sometimes friendliness.
It's not loving, and it's not just kindness. It's a kind of kindness that has a little caring or compassion behind it. So it's a love that manifests as kindness rather than grasping and attaching an ownership. And someone says, What is that about? I'm not going to go further than that. In the Chinese also, this comes very close to what's called Tung Ti Dabe, single substance great compassion. And by this is means one body great compassion, meaning one substance, meaning with all things, not just with all people, but with all sentient beings. And I would say by extension, all that supports sentient beings. And so basically it's a oneness with all under heaven, all creation. And a oneness means, at one level, a sense of this is my body. In other words, there's not a duality, my body and all things, or my person and other people, but there's a sense that this is a unified field of something, and that as I exist in co-relationship with all these living beings and all matter and energy. So it's a very different sense of what we might think of a compassion. There's something that comes close to it, and I like. I've shared this before, but I'll do it tonight. And also because it's one of my mentor's favorite poems. Henry Rosemont loved this passage. This is from poet, philosopher, theologian. In those days, you didn't have to declare a major or a career. He could be all these things at once. A contemplative called John Donne. And this was written, interestingly, when he was seriously ill in the winter of 1623. So it's quite a while ago. But the sentiment, and this is interesting to me that he writes it when he's ill. Sometimes when we're ill, we get to a different level in our being and our consciousness that's, in some sense, perhaps more real, because the illness and the pain kind of cuts away sort of attachments and desires and feelings, physical, emotional, and whatnot, down to a bare bone, so to speak. And sometimes the more ill you get, the more you get down to almost a quintessence of, and it's very fragile at that point. But at that point of fragility, there's also a kind of clear scene, because there's not much that's obstructing your view of yourself and things. So I don't know if this is what he was going through, but I've been ill very many times, sometimes very deeply ill, and I know that sometimes from that spot can come resolves and aspirations and insights that you don't get when you're bouncing around full of energy. And so he writes this, but what he's writing about here in his illness, rather than sinking into himself and feeling sorry for himself, he has a kind of vision. This is called a meditation. It's not called a poem or a verse. It's called a meditation. So it's coming from what he would call meditation, which is a direct accessing, unmediated by any kinds of what we would call false thinking or desires. In other words, there's a kind of mystical union with something beyond the narrow egotistical individual. And so the meditation that he's using, because he's coming from a more Christian tradition, is a reducing of the ego through a contemplation or a fixing of the mind and the heart on something. Perhaps it's a saint or a figure of a saint, or perhaps it's a beatitude, or perhaps it's a passage of text from the Bible. But in that state, usually the goal is to lose oneself, in a sense, and by losing oneself, be open to something else. In Buddhist meditation, you lose oneself in order to have some connection. In the Buddhist meditation, you just lose yourself. Not to have anything. It's a very different approach, but let me just go. So he writes this from, and his insight, his vision is the interconnectedness of everything, rather than, oh, woe is me, and da-da-da. So here's the poem, or the meditation. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of cotton, the continent a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is less. As well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manner of thy friends or thy own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind. Therefore, never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. If we take it apart, I mean, he's using, first of all, that no person is an island, a self-contained, isolated monad, sort of, entire of itself. Entire of itself means dzishing, self-nature. So it doesn't have a nature of itself. And this is very Buddhist in a sense, because our nature is no nature. There is no essential nature. Everything is interconnected, interpenetrating, conditioned. In the Confucian sense, this means that we are the sum total of our relationships with the natural world and with all those around us, friends, family, fathers, mothers, sisters, brothers, the garbage man, and you think of it now, the people on the front lines in the hospitals. If you want to see how entire you are of yourself when you get sick, how quickly do you run to the emergency room of the ICU to get taken care of and realize I am not myself except with the support of all these people giving to me. I'm by myself, I'm gone. I don't have. So this becomes a contemplation in this time of the virus and people's sickness to think no man is an island entire of itself. We are completely interconnected, both for good and for bad. Because we're interconnected, the germ, the virus can spread. But it's also because we're interconnected that when we are sick, we mutually depend on each other. And we mutually depend on each other to stay apart, which is a way to stay connected in the done sense here. Okay. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. Here he uses a body of language as saying the continent, the main, meaning the main land, the mainland. Every man is a part of that. So it's made up of the whole. If a clod, what's a clod?
Piece of earth.
Yeah, it's just a piece of earth. It's sort of like on the coast here, you get a wave comes in and knocks off a piece of the cliff, and it just to be washed away by the sea. The whole continent is less. So it's just a little piece of dirt, but the whole continent is that much reduced. And then he says, as well as if it were a promontory. Promontory means
I don't know.
a huge hunk. It's like, a promontory be Marin or the headlands. The whole headlands is just washed away, right? As well as if a manor of thy friends or thy own. What is that?
House.
Well, manor is not a house. It's not a condo. Manor is a big estate, right? So he's going from the Europe, a little clods washed away, as well as, it's listed for that. Just the same, this little clod, just the same if it were a huge promontory, or your own house and land, or your friends. So he's doing a whole thing of just connecting the human to the natural, to the big and the small. And then his famous line, any man's death diminishes me. So now he's carrying the analogy over and saying, I am a part of all humanity. Therefore, when one passes, part of me also passes. It's a very non-egotistical view. It's not a rights-based, individual, isolated, hermetically sealed monad. But really, in his meditation, he's actually seeing himself as an interconnected being. Being not, and we always think of being and we use it as a solitary sense, but that's not what's meant here. And it's not meant in the Buddha sense, and it's not meant in the Confucian sense. Being is to be in connection. It's to be in web of relationship. Isolated alone, you do not exist. This is really, yeah, okay. Any man's destination because I'm involved in mankind. I am intimately woven into mankind. I did not come into this world alone. I came in through parents. When I was born, I wasn't just like, ta-da, here I am, but rather someone delivered me. There was a lot involved, and a lot of care went in keeping me alive in those first couple of years and so forth, up to the point I learned to walk and da-da-da-da-da. All of this involved care, instruction, maybe sometimes scoldings, uplifting, nourishment. I'm involved in mankind. Mankind then and now completely keep me alive. In the monastery here, monks can easily contemplate this because all their requisites come from donations. The clothes, the food, the medicine, everything is the involvement with humankind. And the humankind that supports the monastery also is involved with the Buddha Dharma because it's their support that gives this a place and holds it up. And it's the Dharma that gives them meaning and aspiration and the fulfillment of wishes and so forth. So there's a reciprocal, almost a non-dual relationship between the donor, the receiver, the monastery and the world, humankind and monastics. Anyhow. And therefore, he says, never sent to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. Now that one probably, you would guess what that is. What is that?
I've heard it before.
That's not this one. That's not that bell.
The bell for telling when somebody dies.
It's the, what's called the Requiem bell. The Requiem bell. I know this very well because growing up in a small rural kind of setting in Wisconsin, especially on the farm, you have farms that are distributed around the countryside, and then you have a little village or town. In a little village and town, there's a general store, usually a tavern or two, and a church, and the church has a big steeple, and in the steeple there's a bell. And so when somebody dies in the village, they're brought to the church for a funeral service. And prior to the funeral service, the big bell is rung. And when the big bell is rung, it's rung slowly, so it's bong, bong. Now, when it's time, 12 o'clock or something, it goes bong, 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 and then bong, bong, bong. But when it's a funeral bell, it's very slow. Bong, bong. And when you hear that, everybody on the farm, when I was growing up, would stop and pause. And what you do is you count it. And however many times that bell rings is the number of years the person lived before they died. So if it stops at 9 or 10, you're going, holy moly, someone very young died. Stops at 20 or 30, could be, someone very close. Everybody gets a little better feeling as it goes past 50, 50 bongs, 60 bongs, and it's like, okay, this is more natural. But everybody pauses and counts because everybody knows somebody else, and they know that the number of bells rung is somebody at that age level, and then pretty soon they start to put the pieces together who that might be. So it's kind of a meditation of death in itself to have that done. In any event, when I was young, my grandmother was in a very severe car accident, and she was more or less paralyzed, crippled, even though she raised 7 kids from that position. Doug Power's mother was like that too. She had 4 sons, but that's like having, 8 kids mixed. Anyhow, so my grandmother would knock on the window. I'd be outside, and she'd say, "Send me to the church to see for whom the bell tolls." Now, I wasn't a smart alecky kid. I could have come back and said, "Don't send to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee." She would have thought that was pretty uppity, if I'd made this comment, even though she was very familiar with this poem. But the thing was, I was supposed to go to the church and find out who that person was at the number of bells. And so Donne ends his poem here. He says, "Don't send to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee." In the same way, when someone is born, we advance, we're increased. A child brings joy, brings curiosity, brings us back to teaching and taking care of. It's an opportunity to teach and take care when a child comes into the world. Conversely, when someone passes, then a part of us goes out. So on either end, whether we're adding or subtracting, it's part of us. It's our involvement. Okay, so I just really like this thing by John Donne, this poem. And I think then transference, in the Buddhist sense here, is this wish to give, this wish to pass on. But it's, again, more on the mental rather than the physical. So you're not actually doing dana, you're not doing the giving paramita as much as you're giving with an attitude or an orientation. And I would say it's more than that. It's actually an embodiment, it's a way of life. The transference is not an act. It's not simply an attitude, but it's a way of being. And it's a natural expression of great compassion, and great compassion is a natural outgrowth of wisdom. When wisdom arrives and you see the truth of non-self, and you see this complete interrelatedness, the Avatamsaka says, at this point, the Bodhisattva sees no difference between himself or herself and all worlds and all beings. All worlds and all beings. That's the wisdom. With that wisdom, then, compassion is natural because in taking care of all, you're taking care of yourself, and taking care of yourself, you're taking care of... It's not 2 different things. And in fact, your morality then takes care of itself as well, because naturally you don't have to think, will this harm others? Which is already a dualistic thought. Is this harm is enough? Harm self, harm others, it's one and the same. And then compassion is the root of transference. So transference comes out of compassion. Maybe say something else here, because I think transference is actually in the nature of things. It's not something that is religiously cultivated. The boundaries that we imagine separate us from each other and the natural world are really what we call wangshan, wrong thinking, false thinking, wrong looking at things the wrong way, creating a boundary between myself and you guys, us and the larger world is all a projection. It's an ego-driven delusion, but it's not how things really are. That's why I'm going back to John Donne's realization, and we were saying earlier, it's almost as if wisdom sees things as they really are. It's not that wisdom injects into things something and pretties them up or constructs them in some way. Wisdom is actually the dropping away of all delusion, of all misreading, all confusion. When it drops away, you see things as they are. You see things are naturally, totally, in a state of total transference 24/7. Whoa. That's a very different approach, and therefore you get with it. Your wisdom of seeing this, you naturally align with the way things are, and that puts you into a transference state of being, embodiment. So it's not just a spiritual kind of insight or piety, if you will, but it's actually scientifically sound. I would say here's where science and Buddhism totally line up. The idea of great compassion and transference accords with what we understand to be the nature of reality. That in fact, all matter and energy, earth, air, fire, and water, part of my body, part of the larger world, is constantly in relationship, interacting, and not apart. And I'll give you some examples of this. One, I think you could look at the present virus that, quote, is going around as a statement of the porous membrane of this world and humanity. We are not sealed off. I am not sealed off with my skin. My skin is a membrane. It's another organ that's related to the larger world. It's not a sealed off piece of plastic. My breath goes out, comes back in. When it goes out, you get part of it. When yours goes out, I get part of it. So you look at the virus and you realize how quickly it's spread is a testament to the fact of the incredible interconnectivity that exists. Moreover, it doesn't stop at different countries. You can call it a Chinese or a whatever you call it. That's really stupid. That's the dualistic mind. These things just move across time, across space, across continents. They don't have borders. You can't put up a wall and keep them out. I mean, all of our dualistic, me, other kind of thinking breaks down when you are facing. And what the virus is saying is this is the way the world works. And I mean the world. So it doesn't respect boundaries, nationalities, ethnicities, languages, religious devotion. You believe this or not. It's just there. That's how things are. So I think, this is one way we look at the virus. Obviously, the virus threatens us and so forth. But on another level, it's pointing to this incredible, rapid, unbroken connectivity that we have between us and even the smallest things that we cannot see. Wow. We don't even, most of the time we're not even aware there's such a thing called little living beings called viruses. I'm sorry, they are little living beings, okay? We're not even aware of them until all of a sudden they take us over. And then the awareness increases. What else are we not aware of? Go back to Pascal says we're very unaware of the macro and we're unaware of the micro, and yet we are caught in part of both. And yet we don't think in that way. We think this is the big thing. This is the important thing. It's really funny. It's not scientific, is what I'm pointing out. I remember there was, Heng Sure and I were coming back from Canada, and there was a warning on the plane about the bottled water. And the warning was, drink at your risk. And it was pure Rocky Mountain Canadian water. And I go, well, what do you mean? And so I asked them, they said, well, there's some DDT in it. I thought, wow. But it says, it has the beautiful Canadian Rockies with the snowy glaciers on the top and the water running down into your cup here, and you pop it open, and it breaks the seal. So it wasn't like someone messed with it between the Rocky Mountains and sitting in the airplane. So it's like, well, wait a minute. I thought the Rocky Mountains were pure Rocky Mountain water from these high. She says, that's right. And I said, and DDT is not allowed in Canada. It hasn't been allowed for use in Canada since the 50s. It's been outlawed. When I was a kid, they used to spray it all over our neighborhoods. So if I'm talking and I sort of lose track of things or like go a little wacko, it's because DDT has worked into my genetic system. That's I didn't get malaria, but I got damaged genes. Anyhow, so figuring this out, I find I did some research on it, and what has happened was they thought the mountain water was pure and they were bottling it until they actually did the test. Then they detected not only DDT, but also nuclear waste particles that were in it as well. What would you call radioactive material? And so when they looked at it and they went up, they saw there was nothing there that could explain why that was getting in the water, except the nature of interconnectivity was such that they took, when they banned the DDT, they sold it to places like South America and Africa. We do that with the things that we don't want. We give them to others and make a profit, like cigarettes. We cut down smoking in the United States, but the companies are exporting it to China, Malaysia, and so forth. So Marlboro Man is international. In any event, when that DDT was brought into Africa and whatnot, they would use it all over the land, and then during times of drought and when the dry season came, the winds would come, and that would blow that dust up, and that dust started to blow up and got into the higher atmospheres, and then like a river or a stream, it moves around in the atmosphere. The mountains, the high mountains, act as, because of their density and their composition, as magnets. And so when that dust, it's pulled down magnetically. I mean, talk about an interesting example of karma, what goes around comes around. So they're pulled in, and so those deposits of radioactive material that were being done and tested elsewhere, even from Chernobyl when it got out, and this dust goes around, goes into the magnets, crystallizes into the glaciers in the water, trickles down into the bottle I'm drinking on the plane. So, again, what I'm saying is there's a natural interconnectivity scientifically that we know, and yet we deny it at the very personal, real levels of ourselves. But in fact, that same paradigm holds for us as well. When you start thinking about this, this really starts to break down a lot of sort of geopolitical thinking we have about us and them, about what the language they use is when one wins and one loses. That's called I win, somebody else must lose. I lose, somebody else must win.
Zero-sum game.
Zero-sum game, yeah. That kind of thinking. It's not scientifically sound. It really goes against everything that we know of the natural world and now. And yet, we impose these false dichotomies, these borders and boundaries on the. And this is why, in a sense, we're out of touch. I mean, I'm trying to feel we're out of touch with the way things are, because so much of what we do, sort of psychologically, relationally, and internationally, fights the natural order of things, goes against it. It doesn't mean that we'd be able to solve everything, but we'd go a long way towards solving a lot of our problems and tensions and conflicts if we drop the paradigm of little silos, silo countries, silo beings, silo economies, and just started seeing just as things in nature like this dust and viruses and so forth, everything is like that. Therefore, if you're going to do cost and benefit, if you're going to do accountability planning and cause and effect, you have to be looking at this level. You can't simply reduce it down to something where you have a very, very fine focus, but the field is irrelevant. You're not taking into account. So I'm saying these texts, we can see them as religious texts and so forth, but really, I think at a deeper level, I really can see in the Avatamsaka especially a correspondence between really even our superficial scientific thought we have now. How profound this gets, I don't know where it would go. Whether science can keep up with the Avatamsaka is another question I have. I don't think the Avatamsaka is going to have any trouble keeping up with science. But to see these two as having a discourse, a dialogue, and in fact, both of them pushing us beyond our narrow myopic worldviews and attachments, they could in a sense be dual forces for awakening if we understand them this way. In any event, I would say Henry's thing, and he was extolling the Confucian values, he said, if you understand the Confucian worldview, the individual is really always seen as a relational existence, a relational being. I am a son to my father, I'm a father to my son. I'm a child to my parent, I'm a parent to the child. I'm a teacher to my students, I'm a student to my teacher, and so forth and so forth. So that, and then when one of those goes, part of me goes. I lose part of that. So he says, and this is his language, we are not radical rights-bearing, hermetically sealed monads. Henry had a way with words. Radical, meaning individually distinct, cut off, rights-bearing, my rights and your rights, don't tread on me. Hermetically sealed monads, solitary beings. We don't come in this world alone, we don't last in this world alone, and in fact, we don't go out alone. People are saying, oh, now because of the virus, and I was talking to one of our students in Italy saying the most difficult and tragic thing now in a society like Italy or China where family and relationship is much more central, say, than here. And I don't mean it's not present here, but I'm saying much more deeply there. When the isolation comes and people can't be together, then one of the important events, not only when you come into the world is there a great celebration that you're here. You may not remember that, but a lot of people were very happy, at least at the beginning. You might have disappointed them later, but at the beginning they were all really happy you were here. When you go out, there's also a coming together of everybody saying goodbye and sending off and letting you know you mattered. You made some dent in our lives and we're going to miss you. On the other hand, it's your chance to say, you'll miss me, but you'll be okay because you'll get by. All that is now cut off because people have to die alone. They don't even get to see their loved ones, much less have a conversation. And this is upsetting the psyche. This is upsetting the social fabric. And I think it's indicative that the social fabric is, by its very nature, speaking to the interrelatedness, the monad type of thing. So even if we think we die alone, we don't. You say, well, they do, they die alone. They don't, because the amount of pain and grief and empathy and consciousness that's going and resonating with that person passing is not alone. It's felt, and it reverberates for quite some time. It's an unrequited sort of filiality here, and it's not natural. And so, but what I'm trying to point to here, because it is so natural to feel and to be in this network of being, of relationship, if when we pass, we also feel like John Donne, each one's diminishes me. We feel it viscerally. And I think that's a really important thing. So even if someone dies and we feel they died alone, or now we're alone, the very fact that we're holding that person, their being in memory, in our day-to-day thoughts and feelings, what means we don't come in alone, we don't survive alone, and even with the passing, we are still not alone. And so I think there's something to the idea of, I used to poo-poo this, but in the Chinese sense of the care and the attention to the ancestors. You can do this as sort of a ritualistic, perfunctory thing, but you can also see, in fact, they do continue to abide. They are integral to who I am. My parents and grandparents are integral to who I am right now. When you see me and you're talking and I'm talking to you, you're seeing my parents and grandparents as well. You're seeing a composite. I am all that I have touched and all that's touched me. That's another way of looking at it. So, we're out of time for tonight. I didn't even get to the other two. I got halfway through a verse. Hooray. I want to go on this a little bit. Obviously, next week we'll pick it up again because I want to say more about this, but sometimes I get up here and I get a little carried away and then time goes. So I'm assuming there's no questions, even though someone might. You're welcome to ask questions or write them in, and who's ever running the camera might be able to vet them. If you send them in now, we maybe start next class and look at some of those if you have some. In closing, really feel happy to be doing the Avatamsaka because I think we don't have an antidote right now for this virus, this COVID-19. But if it wasn't COVID-19, it would be COVID-20 or COVID-18 or this bomb or this war or this revolution or this disease. We are all of us in the midst of being and living, and part of that is declining and going. This is the interrelated, and there's no time and no place that I can imagine where dying and death and sickness is not a part of vibrant living and coming in. That being the case, these texts really talk about how you find purpose and meaning in that mix, in that conjunction of birth and death, of living and dying, of gaining and losing. How you find balance and meaning is what these texts are really about. They don't promise you eternal life, nor do they threaten you with eternal damnation. They really say that this is the mix of the fully engaged real life. And if you can wrestle with these things, especially through these texts, each one of these texts and these lines provide a portal into not only reconciling those and coming to terms with those, but possibly even moving a little bit beyond the anxieties and the attachments that come with constructing it through another way of looking. So what it's doing is really expanding our consciousness. It's not taking us away from the real world, but it's really taking us deeply into it so that we can see how it actually works and our place in it and where we belong and where we step out of the pattern of things. So I think at this time, this isn't going to cure this illness, but it addresses a much deeper illness in the human condition. Buddha called basically confusion, grasping, attaching, and suffering as a result. So I'm not a doctor in scrubs, but I'm a kind of, I'm not even an RN. What am I? I'm an ill-trained medic, a barefoot, trying to open up the medicine of this text. And in fact, the Lotus Sutra has a wonderful passage where it talks about the Dharma as this medicine that grows in the high mountains. And it's a beautiful parable, and maybe we'll go into that later. But in any event, this is our contribution here at Berkeley Buddhist Monastery to your health and well-being at every level. And every night, maybe you're going to make some announcements about what the program is? Because this is only Friday night. I think we have now something going almost all the time.
Yes, hello everyone.
How about you go over there? So the mic's over there.
You want me to turn this?
Yeah,
You tell me to turn it till you can see him. I'll turn it. You sit down.
You sit right there
Yeah.
next to the mic. Next to Marty.
And then I'm going to turn the camera
Okay.
so they can see.
Hello everyone.
Don't breathe on.
Is that good?
Yeah, it's
Is
good.
it good? Can you see me? Like Marty mentioned, it's not only one activity what we have here. We have we have every day opportunity for everyone to join many practices, ceremonies, starting from morning ceremony, through meditation. We have 12 p.m. recitation of Guanyin name and Amitabha name later. After that is 30 minutes Guanyin name, 30 minutes Amitabha's name. And many people join, talking about connectivity. We have people from France, from London, from Germany, Poland, China, Canada, from different places in America. Together we chant and transfer merits in the end.
Pretty cool.
It is very kind of uplifting and giving the sense, even we separated from some extent, but also very united in the effort what we are doing together. And I have the kind of feeling that we become stronger spiritually, because I can see that people are very sincere in this time, at least myself. It's very kind of inspire me in many sense that this is the answer for these uncertain times, to more deeply insight and use all these tools, what we have. Marty very often saying this spiritual devices to open up the wisdom, you're saying, but also to heal, to kind of more understand and go and connect. So the monastery is now closed physically, but from your home you can be part of a monastery. So we extended the Buddha hall.
It's closed but not hermetically sealed.
Yeah. So you can find all this information on our website, berkeleymonastery.org. I think Jin Chuan will...
Yeah, I'm showing the screen right now, so you can see it.
Jin Chuan is
From
showing the
here,
screen. You
click
can...
any of the information, and then there's a registration form to get to the Zoom links.
Right.
Just here. Please
And
register here.
And also other teachers who used to teach here, like James Barras, Stephen Tainer, Kevin Griffin, they also offer their online classes. So please stay in touch, and see you next week, right, on Friday, and see you tomorrow at 5 a.m. for morning ceremony, if you're willing to join us.
Also, in keeping with the verse, we're going to do an act of transference right now. I'll let you be there and I'll go here.
Second here. Give me just 1 second to get the dedication of merit up here.
May
Sorry. 1 second. Okay. Okay, good.
May every being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace, with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of our endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Bowing respect to the triple jewels.